Allison, thank you so much. It's great to be with all of you virtually, and I appreciate everybody's time. The purpose of today, the big why, I'm excited to talk to you about entrepreneurship as a career choice. As you heard Allison describe in my background, I've done a lot of different things. And I think the root of my interest in entrepreneurship probably started before I came to Carnegie Mellon, but it really got fostered when I was at the Tepper School. And another fun fact in my bio that maybe we should have added is, in addition to all my other ties with Carnegie Mellon, my daughter also attends Carnegie Mellon. She is a junior in the engineering school. And so, like with many of you, as you're probably thinking about career options and choices, you have lots of things to explore. And one of the things I love about this Connect series is how it brings different people together to help you explore what might be the right thing for you. And so, as Allison shared a bit about my bio, one thing that I want to underscore is these different transitions that I've had. And I would never have called myself an entrepreneur until recently, sort of allowing myself that identity, but more so in my career experience have been a lot of entrepreneurship experiences. And so we'll talk about some of those today in the context of today's presentation. And what I do currently, as she mentioned, and working with business owners is really entrepreneurial in the sense that not only am I working with them in my own business, but I'm still very much interested in helping them achieve their mission and their goals. So today, what brought us to this conversation? I don't know if any of you have heard of Steve Blank. He's a pretty famous tech entrepreneur and has written a lot about entrepreneurship. He wrote an article, 10 plus years ago, and the title of the article stuck with me. It's called, "You're Not a Real Entrepreneur." And he talked about, and it was kind of facetious, right? It was his way of saying, that's a dialogue that some people might have either about you or with you, that if you're not in their definition of an entrepreneur, well, you're not an entrepreneur. And so he wrote this blog post about that and 4 types of entrepreneurship. Well, today we're going to talk about 8, because as I was researching for this presentation, of course, there's the 4 that he wrote about, but I, in my own experiences and in my discovery of some others' writings, put together what I think is a more comprehensive view. And so again, as you're exploring your career path, no matter what degree you're pursuing at CMU, there's ways that you can look at your strengths, your motivations, and your fit to choose the right path for you. And we'll be sure to save some time for questions at the end. I love this quote by Maya Angelou because she's really saying, and one of the things that I'm trying to convey to you is that success is really defined by you. It's defining, what makes you happy? What do you like? That discovery of what you like, how you want to live your life, how you want to do things is really ultimately what this is all about. Entrepreneurship, how many of them? There are a lot of entrepreneurs in the world. 600 million is a rough number. And that's a pretty big number. So we're going to unpack that a little bit, because if some of you are thinking about being an entrepreneur, you might be wondering, well, what constitutes that number? And we all know that there's some degree of risk in creating a business. An entrepreneur who's starting a business from scratch has a lot of things to figure out. Building a team around them, securing funding, whether it's loans or whether it's venture capital, doesn't matter. There's still a risk of failure because it's hard to get out of the gates. It's hard to create something from scratch. And so about 20% of new businesses fail during their first 2 years. So this is not an easy thing to pursue, right? To be an entrepreneur and try to figure out problems to solve and then finding that market and finding those customers who want to buy your product or service. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is small business entrepreneurship. There's 8 different types of entrepreneurs. The first 4 are the ones that Steve Blank had included in his article. And we're going to go through all 4 of those, and again, starting with small business. So small business entrepreneurship, it's a great place to start because certainly here in the United States, we are most familiar with this type of entity. They are the Main Street business. They are the ones that are employing most of the people and most of the jobs in our country. 90% are small and medium-sized businesses. And so what does that mean? What does this look like? Well, again, there's a lot of them. In 2020, more businesses opened. We saw a huge spike. These are companies that are under 500 employees. So it's accounting for a lot of jobs created. And like I said, it's very common. And so we're employing more than half of our nation's people in small entities. I have a slight delay in my slides, so that's why sometimes I pause. So you'll have to just bear with me. I can see the presentation in the room. Okay, so for small business entrepreneurs, and this is our first one to go through. And what you'll see here in this presentation today is I'm going to talk about motivations and incentives for each of these categories, because I think it's really important to acknowledge why someone might want to be in this type of entrepreneurial role. A big motivator here is to be your own boss and to make a profit that maybe supports your family, supports the lifestyle you want to have. You're taking a degree of personal risk because you might have to put down personal guarantees, especially if you're seeking a small business loan from the government or from a bank. And you're typically looking to hire local employees or possibly family members. Family-led businesses are a very strong source of business in our country. I noticed that so hopefully the presentation's back up there. For those of you watching online, hopefully there was no issue. So common entities here, again, retail, real estate, transportation, the trades like construction or repair of either commercial or residential buildings, professionals, lawyers, accountants, etc., consultants. The next category I want to talk about is large company entrepreneurship. So I certainly have experience with larger companies. These are companies over $100 million in revenue. And commonly you might say, wow, well, they don't seem very entrepreneurial to me. Why are they on the list? Well, it's because they might have an arm of innovation or entrepreneurship or R&D in their company. One example is Amazon Lab 126. Not sure if any of you have heard of Lab 126, but you've probably heard of some of the products they've created. Kindle came out of there, and some other products like the ones you see on the screen, Alexa, and some of the ordering options for laundry and replenishment consumer products have all come out of Lab 126. So corporate startups locally too, you might be familiar with. One was mentioned in my bio, MSA Safety. It's a company that's over 100 years old, very mature, very well-established company, but they have a corporate startup that's a data intelligence software startup, and that's led by one of our alumni, Gustavo here. And I am proudly one of the advisory board members working with them. They were also a sponsor of our class, the Corporate Startup Lab. And again, Allison had mentioned that I'm one of the professors, adjuncts teaching that course. Mary Beth Green, also a Tepper alum, she's the Chief Innovation Officer at Sheetz. And Sheetz is looking at the future of their business. If you're familiar with Sheetz, they have the convenience environments for gas and for food, and they're looking at their future. So those are two great examples of what we call corporate startups. So a corporate entrepreneur can be also an entrepreneur. In my experience, I worked at American Eagle Outfitters many years ago and was part of the early team that created American Eagle Outfitters e-commerce business and really building that business. So I've always thought of myself as an entrepreneur in that way. Why would somebody join a corporate innovation group? Well, you might be an innovator and you're motivated to solve problems, to make an impact and create new things, but your risk tolerance is different. And it's different in a larger entity that has the budget and the resources and the establishment. And so it's kind of a win-win where you can have a different risk profile. You can be a little more low risk or moderate risk in this type of role. And your financial incentives are going to vary. If you are the founder or the owner of the business and you own 100% of the company, that's quite different than being on the team. You might have financial incentives, but again, it's a different risk reward model than in a traditional startup or new company. So the next one is what we call a scalable startup. And when I was in business school and at Tepper and just so inspired by some of the spin outs, I wanted to be a part of that. I didn't necessarily have the big idea, but I wanted to be part of it. And so when I graduated, that's the path that I took, is I went to work for a few startups in the software area. And some numbers from 2019 to share with you. 2020, I'll also give you some comments. In 2019, we saw record levels of investment in venture capital flowing into first rounds of new enterprises. And in 2020, while that did soften, it's still quite strong. And the other thing that's notable is 2020 for follow-on investments was a record year, with 3 years in a row of record investments of what we call follow-on capital. We call, sometimes you'll hear the term dry powder. So there's a lot of dry powder out there, meaning there's a lot of interest and investment dollars flowing to scalable startups. So what's a scalable startup? Well, these are companies looking for solving product market fit. They're looking to solve problems, create solutions. Typically, with venture-backed funding from venture capitalists, and you're looking potentially for specialized employees, whether they're specialized because of the industry or skills that they have. Typically, those are tech-focused businesses, and you're seeking rapid growth, rapid expansion, rapid adoption, and again, that ultimate goal of big returns. Two examples of founders I wanted to share with you. Gentleman on the left he's the founder of Calendly. I love Calendly as a product. If you haven't yet checked it out, it's a calendar app to simplify your life. But for me, and I schedule a lot of meetings, it's amazing. And the last I saw in terms of their numbers, their valuation was around 30 million. So he founded this business, I think based in Ohio. Don Charlton over on the right. Don's now based in Atlanta, but when he founded Jazz HR, originally was Resumator. I was employee number 12 of that business, and it's in the applicant space for human resources, finding great talent. And he's now in Atlanta. But these are, again, just two examples. I'm sure you can think of many apps that you're using and companies that fall into this category of a venture-backed startup, a scalable startup that's seeking to get fast adoption, fast growth. So what are some of the motivations here? Well, they have a vision. They want to achieve this vision, and they're going all in. There's such a degree of high personal risk, high personal involvement as a founder, as an entrepreneur in this type of business. It can be quite stressful, a lot of pressure, especially if you're venture backed. Or if you're bootstrapped, meaning that you're raising money from your own sources or from friends and family, there is a lot of pressure here. And so, yes, there might be this aspiration to get rich and strike it big. But you, again, the balancing here is thinking about how are you willing to live all the other aspects of your life to achieve that ultimate goal. So the next category is social entrepreneurship. And here, these are businesses that are business for good. They're looking to do good things and make an impact on our world, on our communities and people. They want to solve social problems, affect social change. And what they're doing is they're combining their charitable consciousness with a business strategy. So these are not non-for-profits. These are for-profit entities. Some of these entities you might be familiar with include Tom's, which is shoes and other products, and they had a 1-for-1. So if you bought a pair of shoes, they donate a pair of shoes. There's some sock companies out there that you buy a pair, they'll donate a pair to a homeless shelter. Kiva, Jessica in the middle, she has Pittsburgh roots, and Kiva is about micro donations or micro support, financial support for companies. So it's a fintech platform. And then John over on the right, he's the co-founder of a company called iWorker. And I use iWorker. iWorker is a platform to find talent around the world in developing countries typically to provide freelance services. And these companies All three of them, I believe, are B corporations. So it's a for-profit entity, but they have a aspect that's so important to their mission. They're so mission-driven, purpose-driven, that making a difference is at the heart of what they do. And they care deeply about their stakeholders at large. And yes, they want to make a profit because they see it as a way to ultimately give back in that thriving aspect, but also the causes they support are super important. So the next category is innovative entrepreneurship. And these are some folks that you might recognize. Certainly Bill Gates from Microsoft and Steve Jobs from Apple. And then Sarah Blakely, she is a great example, someone who did not seek venture funding. She bootstrapped her company. It's I don't know the valuation of her business today, but it's publicly traded. It's just a success story. And I think that these people are great examples of innovators. So what are some of the motivations and incentives here? Well, they take an idea, they take a big idea, and they turn it into a business venture. And so ultimately, they're aiming to change the way people live for the better, just to make a huge, huge impact. And they're very motivated, they're very passionate people. And so for them, it's all about the success of that innovation and taking it to the next level. Hustler, I put this one in here. And again, I flash forward for if you had seen that to Gary Vee. To me, a hustler entrepreneur ultimately is Gary Vee. Gary Vaynerchuk runs VaynerMedia. He's created all these other properties. Somebody who's a hustler is just so motivated. They start small, they're bootstrapping their way to success. They've got a crazy, amazing work ethic, and they just sort of explode onto the scene. I mean, I don't know what year I first heard of Gary Vee, but when I first did, I thought, no, I don't know this guy at all. And then everyone else was shocked that because I had a marketing background, I didn't know Gary Vee. They all knew who he was. And so Gary Vee, if you hear him talk and his team interactions, he's just so willing to do what it takes. He's just all in. So an imitator entrepreneur, now this might sound negative, but it's really not meant to be. It's business. So an imitator is somebody who is not creating that business from scratch, like Bill Gates or Sarah Blakely with Spanx. They're not creating, Sam Walton did not invent the store, and Barbara Corcoran from the Corcoran Group did not invent real estate. And Herman Cain from Godfather's Pizza certainly did not invent hospitality pizza, and serving people in his restaurants. So this is about doing it better. This is what the imitator entrepreneur does. They take a process, they take a business model, they look at for this potential where it's not being capitalized on enough. They learn from past mistakes, and they look at it. What can they do better? What can they layer in to build that customer base? And they're just very determined individuals. And a buyer entrepreneur. I think I wish I knew more about this when I was going through the Tepper School. Now it's part of the entrepreneurship curriculum to provide a little more broader education around some of these other options. And so some of these gentlemen you might recognize. Chris Sincar is an adjunct professor, and so is Len Carrick. And I'll talk about Jamie in a moment. So Chris Sincar, his expertise is in franchises, and he works with people to help match them to a franchise that fits their interest. And Len Carrick is a serial entrepreneur, and serial in the sense that he buys existing businesses, he ramps them up, and then he sells them. And his most recent venture was with Uncle Charlie's Sausage. He sold that company last year. So if you're at all interested in exploring some of these other entrepreneurial types of entrepreneurship, there's a class that I mentioned, again, which is the Corporate Startup Lab, which is taught in the spring. And then both Chris and Len also offer some courses. And then Jamie Van Buren, you might have seen Jamie or people from GT Entrepreneurs in the Schwartz Center. GT Entrepreneurs is a search fund accelerator. So what's that? Well, it's enabling people who want to buy an existing business. Typically, maybe it's a family-led company or it's founder-led. And these are more like these small, not Main Street, but these smaller enterprises. It could be a fencing company, or it could be, more of this everyday. It could be in a trades. It could be a service business. So GT Entrepreneurs is a search accelerator. It's providing some know-how and capital so that when a business deal is done with a seller, that these buyers are then, they become the operators of the company. And so with me and the other hat that I wear and working with entrepreneurs to help them in succeeding, it's not only to on the seller side, but it's also on the buy side. I do also work with folks who are interested in buying companies and then do outreach to help make that match. So I've definitely spent some time here too. So a buyer entrepreneur, what are some motivations here? Well, this is, again, a way to buy into a proven business. You're not starting it from scratch. It could be because there's no succession plan for that company. And so you'll have a transition with the owner from a period of time. You can get to learn that business, their practices, what they do. You'll be very hands-on in operations typically. And you're going to look at expanding. You're going to look at taking that business to the next level. It's more moderate risk. You could have a blend of seeking small business loans in addition to maybe having some sort of venture pool from friends and family if you're raising a fund to support you, or you might have saved up money eventually and looking to buy a business on your own. So what are some of the motivations? As I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest motivations to be an entrepreneur is to be your own boss. It's that freedom. It's that freedom to take and chart your own course. It's got a risk reward profile that you need to find the right balance for you. But if you're feeling that at this point, you're in college or exploring all kinds of options, I hope what today showed you is that there are lots of options out there. You can find, I think, an honesty with yourself and what type of financial tolerance you have for risk, and also just from a challenge and impact standpoint. And so the message here is, I think you can really find your fit. If you want to be an entrepreneur or work in an entrepreneurial environment, there is an environment for you. And so to think first about who you want to be, what you want to do, how you want to feel. How do you feel when you're in that environment? If you like the go nature of it, the stress or the fun of it, this ride, this roller coaster, that's a feeling, right? Then there's an excitement around that. But then there's other feelings that you'll need to sort of think about too. And if you know inherently that you don't like it when you feel pressure, then that's probably, maybe a signal to look in a different direction. Also thinking about what you want to own. Some people really value ownership. They want to be an owner of something. And again, there's different ways to find the right balance for you. And just thinking about the types of people that you want to be working with. So finding your fit's a great place to start. And as I said in the beginning, I think it boils down to, it's always three things, and I talk to anyone about their resume or what they want to do with their career, even when they're in their career and they're looking at their next move. I always come back to these three things, which is strengths, motivation, and fit. And I think the more honest you are with yourself, and as it pertains to entrepreneurship, whether you're the entrepreneur and you're the founder, or you want to be in an entrepreneurship type of organization, entrepreneur or otherwise, this is all about you and what your risk reward profile looks like. And so give your time to think, give yourself time to explore, give yourself this permission to struggle with the process, meaning if you're in it and it's not right for you, that's okay, make a change. Or if you want to be in it and you want to give yourself permission to try to think about ways to start out that, as I shared with you in my experience, I started out in a startup. I didn't start out with my own firm like I have today. And my career was really built being additive to the process for entrepreneurial environments, as opposed to creating my own entrepreneurial environment. But I always brought that with me. And I also think that, you have to be honest with yourself. If something doesn't feel right to you, then it probably isn't. But trying something out is the best way to see. to see if that works for you. And also finding really great partners and finding great advisors at CMU with alumni. It's an awesome way to really build your network and also finding that right fit for you. And so the last thing I want to share is just to say, to invite you to be connected. I'll share my contact information with you here momentarily as it comes up. And so connect with me on LinkedIn, connect with me via email if you would like. Certainly invite you to listen to the Succession Stories podcast. I guarantee you will learn something, guarantee it. Every episode, there's something to learn. And to also hopefully, be able to connect with you on what your goals are in the Corporate Startup Lab class, which is starting. We're going to start recruiting students for that in the next month or two, actually. So, Allison, I'm going to turn it back to you for questions. I'm not sure why my contact slide isn't appearing, but we'll make sure that it's in the deck that gets sent out to everybody.
Thank you, Laurie. And do we have any questions? Anybody in the Swartz Center have any questions right now? Not seeing any questions. Let me check on the chat to see if we have any. I don't see any questions in chat, but for the virtual audience, you are able to unmute yourself if you guys have any questions. Anybody? Okay, you want to come up and ask? Okay.
Hey, Laurie.
Hi.
My name is Brian Feldman, and I was wondering, when you're moving from a startup to starting your own company, what were some of the considerations that you had for what path you want to take forward?
Okay. Yeah, I would say that there was a lot in between. When I graduated, it was in the early 2000s, late 90s. And my experience with startups there was really to get experience in a software and tech environment. I didn't share with you, my very first job was in manufacturing and human resources. So I came to business school to not only switch industries, but to switch fields. So I went from marketing and manufacturing and human resources to high-tech marketing. And so that path forward was for me to get experience in tech and get some metrics around how I was able to add value. And then from there, I was able to grow my career over a period of years. And so there's a lot of years between, just to be clear, from when I was in a startup to starting my firm now. It's a lot of years. So that's not necessarily typical. It's just my story. So if your question is, how do you kind of get from one to the next? There's a lot of next, in between. And I would say what ultimately gave me the confidence and the ability to shift gears was when I went from, call it kind of individual contributor to managing, and then eventually as a CEO with P&L experience, and just understanding more about what it takes to run an enterprise and having the change in risk tolerance in my life that I did not have prior. And so that's why I reinforce that a lot with you guys, because it could be, hey, I've got to pay back student loans. I'm not ready to do this yet, right? Or it could be, okay, I've worked now, I've earned this giant bonus, I'm going to start doing a side hustle, and that's going to give you that toe in the water. So whatever it is for you as you're thinking about a transition, if you're not necessarily going to start out with your own business, you could consider getting experiences in organizations that are going to be building blocks for you. And that's ultimately what I had, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks, Laurie.
You're welcome.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Let's see. Okay, well, if we don't have any other questions, thank you, Laurie, for coming to do this.